must apologize. Oh, this semester I said. This is the fourth of this semester? Okay, sorry, my apologies. But more than that, I must apologize for the delay in starting. We are about 17 or 18 minutes behind time. Usually, as I was telling Rohitji, APU standard time is only 2 minutes after the time. We do hope that a lot more people will join us. The problem is that we seem to be doing too many things at any one given moment of time, so there are other meetings happening elsewhere. But I have the enormous privilege to welcome Venkat Dhulipala, Assistant Professor of History at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and he will be speaking to us about the creation of Pakistan. Venkat has an MA in political science from Hyderabad, Deccan, because there is, of course, the other Hyderabad in Sindh, and an MA in South Asian Studies from Wisconsin-Madison, a PhD in history from the University of Minnesota. And he has been researching this subject, creating a new Medina, state, power, Islam, and the quest for Pakistan in late colonial North India, which is also the topic of a book manuscript that he's done. So he is in the process of publishing. I have to say that this is a very interesting subject for us, Venkat, because as a history educator here at the APU, I often tell students that when we look at issues, we must raise problems for analysis. And it just so happens that I give them illustrations of problems of all kinds from the social sciences. It just so happens that one of the problems that I shared with them was the following, that the first formal demand for Pakistan was made in 1940, and within 7 years, they were able to get a separate nation state. But Kashmir, of course, has not been able to separate for so many decades. So how do you explain this, right? And it so happens that Venkat is here precisely to explain such a thing. And he will speak to us, I'm sure, about the fact that Pakistan was no vague idea, that it didn't accidentally become a nation state, and that people had very firm plans about it, which is perhaps why they were able to realize it in that short period of 7 or 8 years. So his paper, I'm sure, will depart from the standard narrative on Pakistan. And I also must add this, Venkat, that in our university, although we deal with two broad areas, education and development, there is a sufficient interest in historical issues. We have historians and anthropologists, sociologists, economists, political scientists here. And there is also an interest in modern South Asian history and certainly in matters Pakistani. So we are all, of course, looking forward to your paper. Welcome once again, and I request you to present your paper.
Thank you, Anil, for that kind introduction. And I would like to thank Chandana Gowda for inviting me here to give this talk to you all. I'd also like to thank you for coming in such large numbers. Usually on an American campus, you don't see so many students unless, of course, it's a compulsory course and, you got to just drag them into the classrooms. I guess I will speak for about 45 minutes or so. I won't carry on much longer than that. I'm also told that there's a rush hour that you would like to beat, and I wouldn't want you to get caught up in it. I'd like to begin with sharing with you my experience as a graduate student. And this is while conducting research at the British Library in London. And I stumbled upon this rather unexpected documents in the private papers of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. The handwritten document, with its ink slightly fading, was the record of a special seance with Mr. Jinnah's spirit held on 13th March 1955, nearly 7 years after his death, and 8 years after the birth of Pakistan. It was conducted by a spiritualist, a certain Mr. Ibrahim, who was present at the occasion to direct the questions. The spiritualist began the proceedings by politely offering a seat to his esteemed guest. The spirit tartly responded that it was already seated, since they had met there for another previous occasion. The spiritualist solicitously inquired about the Qaid's well-being, since on that occasion it had complained about being in a cold and dark place, which it did not like very much. The spirit replied that it was much happier now, for it was in a very good place that was brilliantly lighted and had flowers. As a final courtesy, before the proceedings began in right earnest, the spirit was asked if it wanted to smoke a cigarette, since Mr. Jinnah in life was a heavy smoker. On the basis of an affirmative answer, a cigarette was lit and fixed on a wire stand for the spirit to smoke while it answered questions. Mr. Ibrahim began, "Sir, as a creator and father of Pakistan, won't you guide the destiny of the nation now?" The spirit reacted testily, stating that it was not for it to guide Pakistan's destiny, even though it ominously added that it often saw flashes of evil pictures about Pakistan. A worried Mr. Ibrahim inquired, "Don't you think there is a prosperous future for Pakistan?" The spirit responded icily, "I don't think so. Prosperity of a country depends on the selflessness of people who control its destiny. None at all is eager to be selfless there." Mr. Ibrahim pressed further, "What advice would you like to give the present rulers of Pakistan?" Prompt came the response, "Selflessness, selflessness. That is the only advice I can give them now." The spirit then made a telling remark. "It is easier to acquire a country, but it is extremely difficult to retain it. That is, in the nutshell, the present position of Pakistan, to gain which rivers of blood flowed." As the interview drew to an end, Mr. Ibrahim finally asked, "How are you spending your time nowadays?" Jinnah spirit replied gloomily, "Not very well, my friend. Evil pictures regarding Pakistan are badly in my mind every now and then, and I cannot live in mental peace here." End quote. The story of how this transcript found its way into the archive would no doubt be fascinating, but what is striking about it is the sense of crisis it communicates about Pakistan not long after its birth, a crisis that finally culminated in the first declaration of martial law in 1958. Yet, successive military interventions have not resolved Pakistan's existential crisis, marked by a vexed relationship between Islam and state, fragility of democratic institutions, secessionist and insurgency movements, interethnic and sectarian conflicts, not to mention violent death, assassination, or forced exile of former or serving heads of state. A burgeoning academic scholarship trying to make sense of Pakistan, and that's also a title of a recent book by Farzana Sheikh, has invariably located the source of its multidimensional crisis in the circumstances surrounding this nation-state's traumatic birth in the bloody partition of British India in August 1947. And following Benedict Anderson, this scholarship has largely explained Pakistan's instability in terms of the insufficiency of its imagination by claiming that its nationalist ideology, the famed two-nation theory, while spectacularly successful in rallying the Qawm, in rallying the Muslims behind the cause, was inadequate since it was not accompanied by any program around which the nation could coalesce subsequent to its realization. It has thus been widely noted that Muslim League rallies resounded with a popular but vague slogan, "Pakistan ka matlab kya? La ilaha illallah," meaning, what's the meaning of Pakistan? There is no God but God, with the added implication that this nation state was not articulated beyond emotional slogans of this kind. The political scientists Christoph Jaffrelot and Farzana Sheikh have recently separately noted that this lack of positive content or consensus in Pakistan's nationalist ideology is indeed the primary reason behind its nearly continuous post-colonial travails. Well, the term post-colonial may be slightly problematic because, well, there was no colonial Pakistan, but I'll nonetheless use it. This argument itself about the instability of Pakistan based on an insufficient national imagination itself builds upon a consensus that has developed over nearly 3 decades in partition historiography. That Pakistan was an exceedingly vague idea in both elite and popular consciousness, whose accidental formation was the unexpected result of the breakdown of constitutional negotiations between the British government, the Congress, and Mr. M.A Jinnah. It is broadly understood that Pakistan emerged in the context of a sharp disjuncture between the inchoate aspirations of the Indian Muslim masses and the secret politics of pragmatic but ambivalent Muslim political elites who led the struggle for its creation. The persistence of this view owes itself in no small measure to the work of the historian Ayesha Jalal, who argued that a vaguely defined Pakistan was Jinnah's bargaining counter, which he never intended to realize. As regards popular conceptions of Pakistan, Jalal dismissed them tersely, noting that, I quote, "A host of conflicting shapes and forms, most of them vague, were given to what remained little more than a catch-all, an undefined slogan," end quote. While this view was soon contested by Anita Inder Singh, who was her counterpart at Oxford, who demonstrated that Jinnah had always worked towards achieving Pakistan as a separate sovereign state, Singh nonetheless agreed with Jalal that Pakistan was an extraordinarily vague concept and that it meant all things to all Muslims. This line of thinking ironically finds much support from the critic of great man history, Gyan Pandey, who has noted that, I quote, "The Muslims had fairly widely supported the movement for Pakistan, though, as was already becoming evident, few had clear ideas about what that goal meant," end quote. Now, this line of thinking finds further support if one were to turn to regional studies of the Pakistan movement, focusing on the partition provinces of Punjab and Bengal. For what they do is that they point to Pakistan's late popularity in these provinces, besides its insufficient and uncertain comprehension amongst local Muslims in these provinces. Now, given that the partitioning of these provinces was accompanied by tremendous violence, displacement of millions of people, ethnographies dealing with personal histories of these people, especially women and refugees who were caught up in partition violence, constitutes the newest wave of scholarship in the field of partition studies. And here too, these studies again emphasize the utter bewilderment and helplessness of the people at what was happening as their worlds collapsed around them due to unfathomable political decisions that came to be taken at the top in the very last days of the Raj. Now, this anthropological turn has been accompanied by an increasing interest in the literature and film or cinema, now deemed more suitable than historians' history for articulating the suffering and displacement caused by the partition. Finally, as regards the religious moorings of the Pakistan movement, it has been pointed out that this was an incongruous religious nationalism led by Jinnah, an anglicized lawyer, whose appeals to Islam in the cause of Pakistan, of a vaguely defined Pakistan, were only tactical and never out of conviction. And while Jinnah and the secular Muslim League elite occupy a central space in the partition drama, the role of the ulama has remained quite obscure. It therefore seems evident that if an earlier generation of partition scholarship was trapped between the Indian nationalist historians hailing the Congress Party's secular nationalism and Pakistani nationalist historians swearing by the Muslim League's two-nation theory, between the divergent emphasis of the next two waves of scholarship over the past 2 decades or 3 decades, partition studies remain stuck at the incongruous polarities of Jinnah and Saadat Hasan Manto's eponymous hero, Toba Tek Singh. Now, my work seeks to move beyond this impasse by staking a middle ground between these twin poles and analyzing how the idea of Pakistan was articulated and debated in the public sphere and how popular enthusiasm was generated for its successful achievement in the last decade of British colonial rule in India. In this regard, it turns to the United Provinces of Agra and Awadh, now Uttar Pradesh or UP, whose Muslims played a critical role in Pakistan's creation, despite their awareness that the UP would not be a part of Pakistan. The UP presents a particularly appropriate site for exploring the popular underpinnings of the Pakistan movement, for it is here that the idea of Pakistan was arguably found the earliest, most sustained, and overwhelming support, much before it found traction in the Muslim majority provinces of British India, where Pakistan was ultimately realized. My study argues that far from being a vague idea, and this is, well, let's say the thesis statement, far from being a vague idea that accidentally became a nation state, Pakistan was popularly imagined in the UP as the new Medina, the first Islamic state after the Prophet's Medina that would herald the renewal and rise of Islam in the modern world, the new leader and protector of not just the Indian, but the global community of Muslims as the foremost power in the world that was going to be replacing Turkey, and therefore thus a very worthy successor to the defunct Ottoman Caliphate. It specifically foregrounds the role played by the Deobandi ulama in creating this imagined national community, which was acutely aware of Pakistan's global historical significance, a narrative that has been written out of most accounts of partition. More importantly, it highlights the collaboration between the ulama and the Muslim League leadership as they forged a new political vocabulary, fusing ideas of Islamic nationhood and modern state to fashion the most decisive public arguments in favor of Pakistan. One should be left in no doubt that Pakistan became the most pressing political issue confronting the subcontinent as soon as the Muslim League lobbed its bombshell in Lahore in March 1940. It would be talked about, discussed, debated, fought over in the popular press, through books and pamphlets, in public meetings and political conferences held in cities, towns, bazaars, and qasbas across the length and breadth, especially of the UP itself. The importance attached to press and newspaper coverage in this battle over the hearts and minds of the public can be gauged from this fascinating story narrated by the Congress Muslim Rafiq Zakaria. Most of you would probably now recognize him, he's no longer anymore, as the father of Fareed Zakaria. About a public meeting that was addressed by Jinnah in Bombay. And I quote from Rafiq Zakaria's account. Just before the meeting, Jinnah's behavior startled me beyond comprehension. He arrived at the specified time. He was always very punctual. He surveyed the scene, and when he could not see the press seated prominently in the front rows, he lost his temper. He turned to the organizers and shouted angrily, "Where is the press?" And then, in full hearing of the public, since the mic was on the dais, he thundered, "Do you think I have come to address these donkeys?" He wanted his remarks to be conveyed more to the world than to the assembled crowd. The organizers ran helter-skelter and finally managed to arrange chairs and tables near the dais for the press representatives. End quote. Now, if the idea of Pakistan is going to be debated in the public sphere, through the press, through public meetings, how exactly is it going to be debated? I will try to kind of provide some of the broad strokes of these arguments. One of the things what I did was I sent Chandan an article of mine which appeared in Indian Economic and Social History Review, July-September 2011. And I think he will be circulating that article to you very, very soon, in which I kind of present these arguments and counter-arguments between opponents and proponents of Pakistan in very great detail. But nonetheless, what I'm going to do today is not going to be in as much detail, but I'll still try to present some broad strokes of these arguments. Now, immediately after the Lahore Resolution, Pakistan was criticized as a confused medley of ill-conceived ideas at best, or empty slogans at worst. If Jinnah was to emerge as the sole spokesman of the Indian Muslims, and the Muslim League as their sole authoritative representative organization, as the term goes, Musalmano ki Wahid Numayinda Jamaat, They needed to respond to this criticism and take firm charge over the message of Pakistan, besides disciplining the multiplicity of voices and messages in this process. The Muslim League began by pushing back against the shrill claims of Indian nationalists that Pakistan would be an economically poor, militarily feeble, politically impotent, administratively feckless entity that would collapse and be forced to meekly return to the Indian fold sooner rather than later. In response, Muslim League propagandists built a detailed case to convince its domestic supporters as well as an international audience that Pakistan over time would not just become a far more powerful state than Hindu India, but the most powerful Muslim state on the global stage, replacing Turkey. They repeatedly harped upon how it was already a far more powerful and resourceful state than modern Turkey, and therefore the more obvious candidate for assuming the role of the protector of the global Muslim community. Muslim League propaganda pointed out that a sovereign Pakistan, and here one of the things I point out is this collection of 2 volumes, which is edited by put together by this journalist Muhammad Sharif Trusi, which who writes under the initials MRT. The first volume is called Pakistan in Muslim India. The second one is called Nationalism and Conflict in India. Some of these 2 volumes put out a lot of the Muslim League propaganda, which then begins to get reflected in newspaper reports, in editorials, in public meetings in which local Muslim League functionaries are making their arguments, so on and so forth. Muslim League propaganda pointed out that a sovereign Pakistan formed in the Muslim majority provinces of British India would be a country twice as big as France in size, with a population as big as that of Italy. Based on figures regarding the existing revenue of Pakistan provinces, taxes extracted from them by the center, customs duties siphoned from the port of Karachi, Pakistan's national income was calculated as being greater than that of Turkey. Its comfortable financial position was further buttressed by estimates of Pakistan's immense economic potential based on its natural resources, infrastructural assets, and the projected development of agriculture and various industries for each of its provinces. This propaganda also expressed confidence that Pakistan's comfortable financial position would enable it to set up effective political and administrative mechanisms for the purposes of internal security and to build up its defense forces for guarding its frontiers against Hindu India, besides investing in national development. Jinnah himself set up a planning committee to evaluate the economic and industrial prospects of Pakistan areas, to which he would also invite, I think perhaps the grandfather of the founder of this institution, Muhammad Hasham Premji, but the latter, however, would not go on to join the committee. Pakistan's population, comprised of healthy martial races inspired by Islam and free from both Hindu and British domination, was depicted as being more than capable of defending Pakistan's frontiers against India. Moreover, Pakistan was characterized as a bulwark for Islam against the rampaging imperialism of Hindu India, as Jinnah would declare during his visit to Egypt in December 1946. If Pakistan was not created, the whole of the Middle East and Egypt in particular would be threatened by Hindu imperialism. More importantly, Pakistan was expected to assume a leadership role in uniting the Muslim world in a separate bloc. As Khaliq-uz-Zaman, the top-ranking UP Muslim League leader, once declared, Pakistan would bring all Muslim countries together into Islamistan, one pan-Islamic entity, end quote. The contribution to the Islamic world, however, was conceptualized in much more ambitious terms that extended beyond its mere physical defense. Pakistan was hailed as the laboratory of Islam that would creatively blend Islam with Indian Muslim experience of modernity to take the lead in finding definitive solutions to the problems of the modern world, and in the process inaugurating an Islamic renaissance in the 20th century. Shaukat Hayat Khan, the son of the legendary Sir Sikandar Hayat Khan, who was the premier of Punjab province, recalls Jinnah telling him that Pakistan would be the base from where Muslim scientists, doctors, engineers, economists would be trained, and from where they would spread throughout the entire Middle East to serve their co-religionists and create an awakening among them. More importantly, this powerful nation state was expected to protect Muslims who would be left behind in Hindu India. The Muslim League leadership therefore made it clear that if Muslims in Hindu India were ever harassed or persecuted by the Hindu majority, a sovereign Pakistan would exert diplomatic pressure on a bilateral basis, take up their case in international bodies, provide them with moral and material support, and even go to war with Hindu India. In this regard, the Muslim League leader Sir Abdullah Haroon drew parallels to the situation of the Sudeten Germans under Czechoslovakia and admiringly referred to Hitler's actions to liberate them. Jinnah himself noted that, I quote, "If Britain in Gladstone's time could intervene in Armenia in the name of protection of minorities, why should it not be right for us to do so in case our minorities in Hindustan, if they are oppressed?" End quote. But most importantly, Muslim League ideologues frequently invoked the hostage population theory, which held that the presence of hostage populations of Hindu and Sikh minorities in Pakistan would ensure Hindu India's good behavior towards its own Muslim minority. The pervasiveness of this theory among UP Muslims is underlined by the account of P.W. Radis, a serving ICS officer in UP and the collector of Faizabad district. While visiting weavers in Faizabad, he asked them as to what they would hope to gain from Pakistan. The reply was that, I quote, "If the Hindus annoyed them, their brethren in Pakistan would be able to take revenge on the Hindus there." End quote. A very pleasant prospect, Radis exclaimed grimly. The seriousness with which the Muslim League articulated the idea of Pakistan through some of these tropes can be discerned from the fact that the Qaid himself warned the Muslim League supporters that, I quote, "It would be a great mistake to be carried away by the Congress propaganda that the Pakistan demand was put forward as merely a counter for bargaining." So he repeats this many times because, well, one of the fundamental assumptions of the Jalal thesis is that Pakistan is this bargaining counter being used by Jinnah, but in public, even though, well, one never knows if he's using it as a bargaining counter or not. But, for that you'll have to probably invoke his spirit again. But he repeatedly makes this case in the public that he's not using it as a bargaining chip at all as far as negotiations with the Congress or the British government is concerned. The earliest critiques of Pakistan and the Lahore Resolution began to appear in the Urdu press in the UP within weeks and months of the Lahore Resolution, such as the essay titled "Hindu India or Muslim India par ek ahem tabsira" in the weekly Naqib by Maulana Sayyid Muhammad Sajjad Bihari, an alim belonging to the Jamaatul Ulama-e-Hind, which was closely aligned to the Congress party. Maulana Sajjad began his critique of Pakistan by pointing, or Lahore Resolution at this point, because this is still 1940, within months of the Lahore Resolution, by pointing out, I think one page didn't get printed. Oh, it's down here, sorry. Muslim League had been raising a hue and cry over the real or hypothetical atrocities committed by Congress governments over Muslims in minority provinces such as UP, Bihar, and central provinces. And yet, with scathing irony, he pointed out that the solution that they finally proposed for these problems under the Lahore Resolution contained nothing for them and was primarily, concerned with liberating the majority provinces' Muslims who had no complaints about the existing defective arrangements of provincial autonomy under a single center in Delhi. Maulana Sajjad next focused on demolishing the Muslim League's two main justifications for creating Pakistan as he understood them. First, that Pakistan would be established as an Islamic state that would benefit the entire Islamic world, and two, that Pakistan would be the potent protector of communal rights and interests of Muslims who would be left behind in Hindu India. Taking on the first proposition, Sajjad argued that an Islamic state could be established in Pakistan only if two important conditions were fulfilled. In the first place, if the Muslim League promised to repatriate the substantial non-Muslim minority, almost half of the existing population currently living in its domains. A second prerequisite in this regard was that the Muslim League needed to explicitly declare that non-Muslims would have no role to play in the government of Pakistan. Given that both these conditions could never be fulfilled, Sajjad therefore condemned as fraudulent the designation of one state, Pakistan, as Islamic and the other, Hindustan, as Hindu, even though they were two composite entities. So he feels that this is a big fraud, calling Pakistan Islamic and Hindustan Hindu. As regards the second justification for creating Pakistan, Sajjad harshly criticized its extravagant claims about securing the lives, properties, and interests of the minority provinces' Muslims. He particularly attacked two ideas that were being bandied around by Muslim clique functionaries in this regard. First was the hostage population theory, and second, that Pakistan would not hesitate to declare war on Hindu India in order to protect its oppressed Muslim minority. Taking on the first idea, Sajjad strongly assailed its threat of retributive violence against religious minorities. No Muslim government, he argued, could commit atrocities on its own peace-loving citizens simply because Muslims were being persecuted elsewhere. Such a policy was contrary to the Sharia, which expressly enjoined Muslim rulers to treat their minorities with fairness and compassion. Moreover, such a policy did not conform to the conventions of international relations, nor did it have any historical precedents. Here, Sajjad pointed out that Muslims around the world had long been oppressed by British imperialism, and yet Turkey, the foremost Muslim power of the world that Pakistan was expected to emulate, had never retaliated even once against its own Christian subjects. As regards the efficacy of the second idea, Sajjad again cited the example of Turkey to demonstrate the bogus nature of the ML's argument. Turkey had not come to the aid of the Indian Muslims during the 1857 mutiny, which was eventually crushed by the British. Indeed, neither Turkey nor any Muslim state had mustered sufficient courage to even serve a diplomatic notice on Britain, leave alone going to war for their sake. More recently, he noted that Albania had been forcibly annexed by Italy, and yet all that the free and semi-free Muslim states of the world had done was to sit and passively watch the show. But the most prominent example Sajjad brought up was in the context of the case of Palestine. Sajjad lamented that the Muslims of Palestine had repeatedly narrated their tale of woe before the whole Islamic world, petitioned Muslim governments to help them in their fight for freedom, and also given a call for jihad to overthrow imperialist domination. Yet, Indian Muslims and the Islamic world had largely ignored Palestinian entreaties. Practically speaking, he noted that the population figures of Pakistan would be 60% Muslim and 40% Hindu, while Hindustan would be 10% Muslim and 90% Hindu. Thus, in Pakistan, the Muslims would be a precarious majority, while in Hindustan, the Muslims would constitute a very feeble minority. The Pakistan government would thus not be able to target its own non-Muslim minorities in response to Muslims being persecuted in the UP or Bihar, given the strength of the former. In the light of these examples, Sajjad warned minority provinces Muslims not to live under any illusion or hope that hypothetical theories regarding their protection would ever be put into practice. Such absurd ideas, he bitterly remarked, could only be entertained by the worst fool or madman. He uses the Urdu term Battareen Ahmak. The pointer to Jinnah could not have been more obvious. Sajjad lastly blasted the Muslim League's residual plank on Pakistan, which called upon the UP Muslims to sacrifice themselves for the sake of Pakistan. In this regard, he referred to Jinnah's startling statement about his willingness to sacrifice 20 million minority provinces Muslims for the sake of liberating their 60 million brethren in the majority provinces. To begin with, Sajjad charged Jinnah with deliberately reducing the number of minority provinces Muslims from 30 to 20 million in order to downgrade the magnitude of the minority problem in India. But more importantly, using Jinnah's logic, he argued that instead of 20 million minority provinces Muslims sacrificing themselves for the sake of the 60 million majority provinces Muslims, it made more sense for the entire 80 million Indian Muslim population to instead accept slavery under the Hindus, line up behind the Hindu Congress, and work towards overthrowing British imperialism in India. This would be a far more meritorious act in the cause of Islam, since it would have the salutary effect of destroying British imperialism around the world in the process liberating 250 million Muslims all over the world. So sacrificing 80 million for the cause of 250 million was far more meritorious than sacrificing 20 for the sake of 60 million. Maulana Sajjad therefore demonstrated that the plank of Pan-Islam was not just a monopoly of the Muslim League that could be used for glorifying Pakistan, but could also be appropriated and used in ingenious ways to discourage Muslim separatism and support a composite anti-colonial nationalism in India. These arguments were bolstered by a far more comprehensive critique of Pakistan on the grounds of economics, defense strategy, political and social instability, and other grounds by Maulana Hifzur Rahman Seharwi, another alim belonging to the Jamaat-ul-Ulama Hind, which I have discussed again at great length in this essay of mine, which appeared in IESHR, and I would just urge you to refer to it if you are really interested. While the Muslim League's arguments in favor of Pakistan could contend with critiques of its opponents, it was still vulnerable against criticisms that Pakistan could never become an Islamic state. And it is here that we need to take into account the importance of a breakaway section of the Deobandi ulama who break free from the Jamaat-ul-Ulama Hind, form a new organization called the Jamaat-ul-Ulama Islam, join the Muslim League, and this happens especially on the eve of the 1945-46 elections, which become a referendum on Pakistan. Now, the prominent alim who leads this breakaway is a man by the name of Maulana Shabbir Ahmad Usmani, about whom we really don't hear much about in Partition historiography, but who is absolutely crucial for the Muslim League's campaign during the 1945-46 elections. Now, Usmani's arguments for Pakistan provided the Muslim League with much needed theological cover, given the relentless attacks against Pakistan by the Congresi ulama, against the two-nation theory and Pakistan as un-Islamic. Jinnah is also called by them as Kafir-e-Azam. Pakistani territory as inferior when compared to the blessed land of India with its monuments, mosques, shrines, graves of saints and martyrs of Islam. Now, how does Usmani go about defending Pakistan, providing a theological defense of Pakistan? Usmani first put the two-nation theory beyond the pale of critique by arguing that it was not the invention of any man and that its origins lay in the Quran. He pointed out that the final prophecy brought to mankind by Muhammad had deemed that the only valid classification by which mankind could be ordered was between the Mu'min and the Kafir. Indeed, the significance of this classification lay in that while the division between Iman and Kufr had always existed, it was only Muhammad's unique prophecy that was able to wipe out myriad small identities to fashion a Muslim identity. Here, Usmani quoted from the Hadith, Sahih Muslim. I quote, "When the Prophet asked his flock, 'What Qawm are you?' they did not reply they were Hijazi, Yemeni, Najdi, or Qurayshi. All said in unison they were Muslim." The arrival of Islam therefore meant that all idols of Watani and Nasli asabiyat means basically tribalism, broke down, and all that remained was their Islamic identity. Usmani also introduced a local metaphor to drive home the point that the sons of Islam in India were an exclusive qawm. He noted that in India there were big and small rivers such as the Ganga, the Yamuna, the Narmada, which had their own distinct identities. However, beyond a point, these identities merged themselves into the larger identity of the ocean. In the same way, distinctions based on community, class, race may have existed earlier, but falling into the ocean of Islam, they joined in the formation of the Islamic nation where all their previous distinctions and differentiations ended. It's a highly idealistic notion. Usmani concluded that the Muslims of India had always carried the revelation of their separate nationality in their hearts and never gave it a second thought until the Congress raised such a hue and cry with its theory of Muttahida Qawmiyat or composite nationalism. This is the theory of composite nationalism put forward by another famous alim, Hussain Ahmad Madni, who is the closest ally the Congress has in the Jamiat-ul-Ulama-e-Hind. Now, Usmani declared that Maulana Madani's theory of Muttahida Qawmiyat was false and anti-Islamic. To begin with, he noted that even their common teacher, the Shaykhul Hind, Maulana Mahmudul Hasan, had talked of Hindus and Muslims as two separate nations just 9 days before his death. Usmani then countered Madani's interpretation of the pact between the Jews and the Muslims in Medina, which was the presumed bedrock of the theory of Muttahida Qawmiyat. Usmani clarified that under the original treaty between the Prophet and the Jews, the term Qawm-e-Wahid had never been used to designate both Muslims and Jews together as one single community. Even when the term Ummat-e-Wahid was used, the Prophet always gave a cautionary warning that this application was only an extension, a broad interpretation that was valid only under certain conditions. With regard to the treaty, the Prophet had also explicitly declared that in case of a dispute between the Jews and the Muslims, the resolution of that dispute could happen only through the final judgment delivered by Allah through His Messenger. Here, Usmani pointedly asked the nationalist ulama whether the votaries of Muttahida Qawmiyat in the Congress party would be willing to accept such a condition in which the Quran would be the final word in the disputes between Hindus and Muslims. He also declared that the theory of Muttahida Qawmiyat was suspect since it was espoused by nationalist Muslims who utilized the same arguments against Pakistan as was being used by the Congress in the Hindu press. Complementing his defense of the two-nation theory, Usmani emphasized Pakistan's great significance by impressing upon his audience the many uncanny parallels between the creation of the first Pakistan in Medina by the Prophet and the current ongoing struggle for the formation of Pakistan in the subcontinent. He explained that the Prophet had not established Pakistan in his native Mecca, but had instead migrated to Medina, since he was convinced that Pakistan could only be established in an area where Muslims could practice their faith with complete freedom and without any external hindrances, for it was only in such a land that the Muslim community could develop to its fullest potentiality. Usmani consequently stressed upon the cardinal importance of establishing Pakistan in a part of India where Muslims were in a majority, where they could set up their own state based on their own religious laws, and a state which would be completely free from both Hindu or British domination. Pakistan was impossible in the framework of a united India, even if the constituting provinces were given the greatest possible autonomy. Usmani next noted the unprecedented cooperation and unity that had developed between the followers of the Prophet during the creation of Medina, of Pakistan in Medina. So he uses the term Pakistan and Medina quite interchangeably. And this is not, Usmani is not the only one doing it. The Muslim League leadership in the UP is also constantly interchangeably using Pakistan and Medina. These were the unity and the cooperation that he referred to was between the inhabitants of Medina, that is the Ansar, and the migrants, the Muhajirin of Mecca, who had left behind their shrines, their families, and their dependents in order to develop Pakistan. A similar unity, he said, was developing between the Indian Muslims. The Muhajirin from the minority provinces such as the UP were sacrificing their lives for the formation of Pakistan, even though they themselves were neither its inhabitants, nor did they indeed intend to permanently leave their homelands. Usmani, however, declared that their sacrifices would, however, not be in vain. Just as Medina had provided a base for the eventual victory of Islam in Arabia and the wide world beyond, Pakistan would pave way for the triumphal return of Islam as the ruling power over the entire subcontinent. Excuse me. Thus, the whole of Hindustan would be turned into Pakistan, just as the Prophet himself had turned all of Arabia into a Pakistan. Usmani also pointed to, now he comes down to consecrating this land, which is going to be Pakistan, with added significance. Usmani pointed to the blessed nature of Pakistan's territory by justifying Pakistan as being part of God's divine plan. The term is Pakistan ka ghaibi ishara. It was a sign of God's unfathomable wisdom that instead of being a uniform minority spread all over the country, Usmani said that the Muslims were a majority in some provinces, which were also pivotal from a geographical point of view. He further noted that Lahore, the main city in Pakistan, in the Punjab, it was from Lahore that Sheikh Ahmad Sirhindi had launched his jihad against Emperor Akbar and his own theory of Muttahida Qawmiyat, which was Deen-e-Ilahi. It was again at Lahore that the Pakistan resolution had been passed by the Muslim League in 1940, thus connecting it to the earlier jihad of Sheikh Ahmad Sirhindi. Usmani therefore declared, I quote, "It is possible that in his, that is Sirhindi's revelations, there may be a pointer in this direction that when in the future Muttahida Qawmiyat in another form arises, when Deen-e-Ilahi in the form of Gandhism comes to the fore, it will be from Lahore from where the voices for breaking the new idols would issue forth, spread, and flourish." End quote. That is, Gandhism, is the new idol. Gandhism and Muttahida Qawmiyat. Usmani therefore made it clear that Pakistan would indeed be an Islamic state in which the ulama would have primacy in the matters of passing legislation, administering law, besides regulating the religious and cultural life of the Muslims. He laid out the different Islamic offices that would be part of the institutional fabric of Pakistan, that is the office of the Shaykh al-Islam, and Usmani becomes Pakistan's first and last Shaykh al-Islam, when he migrates from Deoband and goes over to Karachi, who would act as the ecclesiastic head of the Muslim Millat, the Grand Mufti working under the Shaykh al-Islam, responsible for regulating and guiding Islamic Qazi courts, adjudicating cases of every recognized Muslim sect under its own rule, under its own school of fiqh, a Bayatul Mal to administer zakat, sadaqat, Muslim charities and communal properties, and manage the public finances, the Diwan al-Shariat, etc., etc. Indeed, the Jamaat Ulama Islam's founding charter declared that it was against the evils of Gandhism, communism, and the godless politics of Kemalism, or the secularization of state and economy, and the divorce of life from the universal moral laws of the Shariat. While dwelling at length on the Islamic functionaries of the state, Usmani, however, did not go into any great detail about the kind of Islamic law that he envisaged for Pakistan. He in fact warned Muslims that an Islamic state implementing Islamic laws could not materialize overnight. It could only emerge out of a process of gradual evolution. As Usmani noted in a very, very delicate metaphor, just like the night withdraws slowly and the light of the day spreads, just like an old chronic patient takes a step towards health and does not at once become healthy, in the same way, Pakistan is a step in the direction of our national health, Qawmi Sehat, towards our high noon, Nisfun Nehar, but a gradual step, Tadriji Qadam. In order to defend this approach, Usmani noted that even Medina had reached its crest only in a gradual way. The Prophet could have crushed his enemies in an instant and established Pakistan immediately, but then it was God's will that the ummah had to arrive at it gradually, receiving guidance from the Prophet at every step. Usmani, however, promised that Pakistan would certainly be the first step in the eventual establishment of such an Islamic state. Usmani's theory of the gradual development of the Islamic state therefore dovetailed neatly with the declared aims of Jinnah and the Muslim League leadership, since it left room for deliberation and negotiations in the process of the establishment of an Islamic state in the future. And some could argue, well, that these negotiations continue, or they have been deferred, or there's no resolution, so to say, for this question in Pakistan. Given the persistent suspicion regarding the Muslim League leadership and the insistent demand in a section of Muslim opinion that the ulama should assume the leadership of the Muslim masses, Usmani attempted to clarify the role of the ulama in a future Pakistan. Usmani asked his fellow Muslims not to be upset by references to Jinnah as Qaid-e-Azam, since it seemed to place him on a higher pedestal than religious elders. He declared that the term simply meant the tallest among them in the field of politics. However, the question still remained as to whether an alim could lead Muslims better than Mr. Jinnah. Usmani sought to answer this question with the help of a rather interesting metaphor. He explained that when the American wrestler Zbyszko came to India, Gandhi was not sent to fight him. Neither was Jinnah, nor Maulana Hussain Ahmad Madani, nor he, Usmani himself, had been sent to fight Zbyszko. Neither Jinnah himself or any of them was, after all, an expert in the field of wrestling. Instead, the Indian wrestler Gama was sent to confront Zbyszko since he was an expert in the field of wrestling. In the same way, Mr. Jinnah was the best expert when it came to the question of representing Muslims during complex constitutional negotiations. Usmani declared that Muslims needed to be eternally grateful to God that they had given him, that God had given them a capable, honest, and peerless lawyer such as Jinnah. Jinnah's task was therefore limited to the task of tackling the British and the Congress on constitutional negotiations. The role of the ulama would begin once this phase was completed. Here, Usmani employed another telling metaphor. Usmani noted that when Muslims from India went on a Hajj, they usually boarded ships skippered by English captains. When the ship carrying the Hajis reached the vicinity of the port of Jeddah, this ship stopped well short of the port itself, given the many treacherous shoals and underwater rocks which the English captain of the ship was not competent to navigate. At this point, an Arab mariner known as the pilot came from shore to the ship to take charge from the English captain and safely guide the ship to the port so that the pilgrims could disembark and step on the Holy Land. Mr. Jinnah, Usmani concluded, was the English captain, who could take the Muslims only up to a certain point. After that, an expert in the Sharia was required, and it is here that the ulama would fulfill their duties like the Arab pilot. Usmani, however, warned that the work of the Muslims could be completed only through cooperation of these two personnel and would be unsuccessful if such cooperation was lacking. Usmani now has to also stoutly defend the credentials of the Muslim League leadership because Mr. Jinnah is hardly the observant Muslim. He had been, of course, vilified by the Jamaat-ul Ulama Hind propaganda as an atheist, westernized person. He was also accused of, marrying a non-Muslim woman, and so on and so forth. Usmani acknowledged at the outset that the Muslim League and its leaders had weaknesses and shortcomings that were certainly objectionable in the eyes of the ulama. He went so far as to call Jinnah a fasiq, a sinner. How much time do I have? The reputation of the Muslim League leaders was preventing a number of religious-minded Muslims from joining the Muslim League. He confessed that he himself had joined the Muslim League after prolonged deliberation, prayer, and a close reading of the Quran, the Sunnat, and Hanfi law. He singled out the clarification provided by the Hanfi jurist Ibn Hasan Shaybani, who in his book Al-Siyar al-Kabir provided him with the mental breakthrough and removed doubts about joining the Muslim League. The clarification pertained to Shaybani's view about the Khawarij or the Kharijites and their relationship to the Muslims. Usmani noted that in the Hadith, Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, the Prophet himself is supposed to have declared that the Khawarij were black in the black books of God, since they had been Muslims in the beginning but then had turned into Kafirs. The Prophet had therefore advised his followers to kill the Khawarij for their apostasy wherever they encountered them. For Usmani, Ibn Hasan Shaybani's brilliance lay in the fact that he came up with an alternative view regarding the Khawarij. and the way Muslims should deal with them. For this, medieval jurists decreed that in case the Khawarij were fighting the Mushriks and the Kafirs, it was the duty of the Muslims to support the Khawarij in these battles. This was because the Khawarij, though despicable, still upheld the Kalima as against the Mushriks and the Kafirs, who were fundamentally opposed to the Kalima. The Muslim League too, he said, had its share of the Khawarij. But since the party was fighting the Mushriks, it was vital to support this organization. If Usmani acknowledged the shortcomings of the Muslim League leadership and criticized them, he also gave the devil its due. Thus, he asserted that whatever might have been his faults, it was undeniable that Jinnah was personally incorruptible, unbending, and could not be bought over by money, and would always be a better bet for the Muslims than a Gandhi or a Nehru. Usmani did not confine himself to making Islamic arguments for Pakistan, but also sought to bolster the Muslim League's secular arguments for Pakistan by providing them with Islamic referents. He too echoed the Muslim League's celebration of Pakistan's Deobandi. So how wonderful the land of Pakistan would be with its natural resources, infrastructural assets, strategic location, so on and so forth. Regarding the hostage population theory, he too tersely asked, just like we are worried about our minority in Hindustan, don't you think that the Hindus are worried about the 3 crore Hindu minority in Pakistan? In this regard, Usmani narrated to his audience, and he used to regale his audience with these very apt stories, a legend in Islamic history from the time of the Abbasid Caliph Mutasim. Usmani recounted that during his time, when a Christian government was ruling in Rome, that is Constantinople, a Christian soldier slapped an old Muslim woman. The poor old woman, in her terror, began to scream for help from the Caliph Mutasim. At this, the Christian soldier slapped the old woman again and asked her whether the Caliph, riding on a white horse, would come to her rescue and take revenge upon him. This little episode, as the story goes, gradually reached Baghdad and finally the ear of the Caliph himself. On hearing the story, an indignant Caliph, Mutasim, resolved that he would not step into his palace unless the old woman's cry for help had been answered. He then ordered all the white horses in this region to be requisitioned at whatever price they were available, raised a powerful army, attacked Rome, and won a great victory. The wretched soldier who had assaulted the old woman was captured and presented to the old lady by the Caliph, who declared that Mutasim had come to her aid. A sovereign Pakistan, Usmani noted, would confer similar advantages. Nobody would dare molest Muslims in Hindustan once Pakistan came into existence. I'll stop here and I'll take questions from now.
Thank you for a very rich account of a much neglected
for your lengthy rethinking of partition historiography. My question, I have to introduce my question before, I think. You got the popular discourses extensively from, but I think these popular discourses dominantly represent the typical Wahhabi, Deobandi political discourse that is still going on in every part of the world, I think. And the question about the relationship between Muslim identity, constituted as the moral foundation for the Pakistan demand, and the myriad particularistic and fragmentary identities and interests that shape the lives and experiences of India's Muslims as a whole. When we consider this relationship, I think we have to look towards the other sects that were dominant at the times. For example, Usha Sanyal of Princeton University has done great research on devotional politics and Ahl Sunnah movement at the British India, and she has drawn our attention into one of the important dimensions, and I think it will support your Rethinking Political Partition Historiography. She has said that in order to hold a position in the ongoing political popular discourses about partition, the devotional politics promoted by the Ahl Sunnah movement, led by Ahmad Raza Khan Barelvi at that time, was exclusively disinterested from this kind of political discourses. And you quoted from some of the classical texts like Sahih Bukhari and Sha'bani's treatise. I think these understanding of classical texts dominantly also represent the Deobandi sect's understanding of Islam. And Jamaatul Ulama Hind is dominantly Deobandi. And also the scholars you represented, Maulana Sajjad, Maulana Azhar Hindi, strongly Wahhabi, and Usmani, and everybody is more or less represent the Deobandi sect. And I think in this rethinking of partition historiography, we have to think before we rethink that in order to reach a comprehensive approach towards the everyday politics that was dominant at that time in British India among Muslims. And one more thing I can add, when they take a parallel look to Pakistan and Medina was used in the popular discourses among the Deobandi sects as to invoke political gains, but on the contrary, at the devotional politics of Barelvi movement, Ahl Sunnah movement, it was used mainly, Medina as an image was used mainly to invoke spiritual linkage to the noble person who is residing at Medina. And I think some of the recent anthropological works have done great attention to this.
Of the elections of 1945-46, it is joined by the Barelvis, by the Nadwatul Ulama, by the Farangi Mahalis, who joined the Deobandis, and so you have a broad coalition of the ulama who are working on behalf of the elections. Of course, some of the Barelvi ulama also migrated to Pakistan, where they found the General Ulama in Pakistan, the JUP, the JUI is the Deobandi, and JUP is the Barelvi organization, which retains prominence in Pakistan. Yeah, I have not really looked at the Barelvis, or for that matter, Peers, Sufi Peers in UP. What is the relationship of the Sufi Peers to the whole Pakistani movement? Because after all, they draw their power from Sufi shrines, such as the machines or what have you. So after all, it's the Farahans, which is the source of their own, of his charismatic power and whatever charisma that they themselves inherit from that Sufi sheikh. So it is true that, I haven't quite considered sects other than the Deobandis, because the Deobandis are the people who really come to the aid of Mr. Jinnah. And they are very, very crucial, because if you look at it, somebody like Maududi is not a terribly consequential figure at this point in time, but somebody like Maududi is constantly questioning the Muslim League's religious credentials, especially Mr. Jinnah's religious credentials. In fact, it is often said that Jamaat Islamic, Maududi was the first in Pakistan, but if you look at Ali Nasser's book, he makes it very clear that Maududi is not opposed to Pakistan, he's opposed to Jinnah being the leader of Pakistan, because this guy is not quite an observant Muslim. And the demand is primarily being seen in terms of something called an Islamic state. This is the first time that a demand of this kind is being made. It's not in the core lands of Islam that this demand first happens. It happens first in the case of Pakistan. Now, so when Jinnah and the Muslim League are being attacked
by Maududi on one hand and the JUH ulama who are aligned with the Congress on the other, he can do with any help coming from any quarter. And therefore, Usmani, and before him, Ashraf Ali Thanvi, who is Usmani's peer, they would provide very, very critical support to the Muslim League. Ashraf Ali Thanvi is very critical, especially during 1937 and 39, when you have 9 by-elections to Muslim seats in the UP. The Congress wins 1 in Wijdan, but then it's wiped out in the remaining 8 months. So initially, somebody like Ashraf Ali Thanvi too is skeptical about Jinnah and the Muslim League. In fact, he compares Congress and the Muslim League. He says one is blind, the other is one-eyed. So what's the big difference? Yeah. But then, one of his disciples, this is Zafar Ahmad Usmani, who also goes over to Pakistan, he says, well, send a fatwa. This fatwa is sent to the Jhansi election, many elections which happened. He says, send a fatwa saying that you don't like the Congress. Don't say you support the Muslim League. Say you don't like the Congress. And then later on, this is replaced by a much more intimate relationship between the Muslim League and Ashraf Ali Thanvi. So yeah, I take the point, but yeah, I have latched on to the Deobandis because they provide the only modicum of support as far as the ulama are concerned. Further questions?
Thank you very much, sir. It was a nice discussion and discourse. There are a few questions coming up in my mind, so I'd like to share those. First of all, as a student of sociology, I feel any article, research paper, or book should be towards national integration and harmony. So I wondered, is there any need of such writing when so much bloodshed had been seen during partition and afterwards? That's my first question. Number 2 is, I wonder, when thousands of ulama were killed by British government, as it is evident from so many resources, we can share further also, during Indian national movement, how come the same ulama were cooking up creation of Pakistan along with Muslim League? That's number 2 question. And I would like to move to the third one as well, that I seriously doubt the stand of a large number of ulama on partition, as they have been greatly influenced by Maulana Abul Kalam Azad's writing in Al-Hilal. You might be knowing that he has been writing for national integration, and he had a great following among ulama for national integration and to be inside India, even after partition. His writings and speeches of a few ulama cannot be considered as the voice of Muslim for creation of Pakistan. And in the last, I would like to comment upon that it is interesting to note that you have tried to highlight parallelism between the teachings of Prophet, peace be upon him, and creation of Pakistan. Creation of Pakistan was not an Islamic idea. That's my perception. It was all about beautiful plan of M.A Jinnah, who wanted to be placed in the world history as he was a noted lawyer and he was a great influencer of the time. And who himself, as you say rightly, he was not a practicing Muslim at all. I hope you are quite aware that the Medina means town in Arabic. It's not always, it is not the power. And kafir means in Urdu, inkar karne wala or non-believer. It never means Hindu only. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your questions. I'll answer your second and third questions first, and then I'll come to your question. I did talk about at some length about Usmani, but I also talk about the other Deobandi ulama who are against Pakistan. So it's not like there is this overwhelming number of ulama who are back in Pakistan and that their voice is what needs to be heard here. I briefly mentioned Sayyid Muhammad Sajjad Bihari. Then there is Hifzur Rahman Sihari, about whom I write in great detail. Hussain himself is very eloquent in his defense of the our composite nation. So I would not in any way want to be seen as portraying the ulama as plugging only a particular line towards Pakistan. There is debate and tremendous contention even within the Muslim community and among the ulama themselves as far as Pakistan is concerned. In fact, Hussain Ahmad Madni in 1941, this is something I didn't want to bring up, writes a pamphlet called Hamara Hindustan Uske Fazai, and in which he talks about, he kind of tries to push back against the claims of both Savarkar on the one hand and proponents of Pakistan on the other. So he makes this claim that contrary to what the Hindutvawadis say, that the Hindus are the original inhabitants of the subcontinent, he says no, it's indeed the Muslims, because Adam is supposed to have descended on Adam's peak in India, and then his followers ended up in India. So even before the Hindus, the Aryans come in, Adam, who's the first prophet of the Muslims, is supposed to have come to India. The other point that he makes is, well, of course, Muslims have a far more intimate relationship with this land of India than the Hindus can ever have. Why? Because the Hindus burn their dead. Yeah, so their remains are scattered in the elements. The Muslims bury their dead, and they stay there till the day of judgment. So they have a very, very intimate relationship. So he makes a series of these arguments. So I would not like to be, I would like to make it very, very clear that the idea of Pakistan is ferociously debated. It's not something which just passes. It's ferociously debated, even though in the end, the arguments made by the Muslim League win. It is nonetheless fairly extensively debated in the popular press, in the public sphere, so on and so forth. Now, this is a question which was asked to me earlier also. Why you writing something like this? Why are you highlighting the role of this group of Muslims led by the Muslim League in the UP towards the creation of Pakistan, when national integration should be our ideal? I was reminded of this article by Ashish Nandi, which came out. You remember Mr. Advani went to Pakistan and made this famous statement about Jinnah being this great statesman and great secular figure, so on and so forth. And of course, everybody came down upon him like a ton of bricks. The BJP, of course, kicked him out of the presidentship. The Congress came down heavily on him, so on and so forth. And of course, there was a general impression that this was a wily Advani's attempt to position himself as a moderate and then position himself as a prime ministerial candidate in the next round of elections. He was trying to buy his way in the Hindutva-wadi. Ashish Nandi was the sole figure who came out in support of Advani. And what Ashish Nandi said was that this kind of representation of history may be quite unfair to the likes of Abu Kalam Allah, who stood for a composite India, for a secular India. Yet, we need to kind of support the resurrection of this other Jinnah, the one who was at some point an ambassador for Muslim unity. We also need to resurrect this other Jinnah, so that the forces, the progressive forces in Pakistan have some stake, can get some leverage out of it by saying, this is the real Jinnah, not the other one. Now, my own take on it is that perhaps Nandi, with his emphasis on history writing as some kind of moral fable, I think chose to back the wrong fable. I think one cannot be uncharitable to somebody like Maulana Azhar. So resurrecting or trying to resurrect this other Jinnah, I'm not sure is that useful. And indeed, in a way, pointing towards the way in which religion religion is mobilized to gain certain political traction within this period. It should serve us as a timely reminder that India itself should not emerge as some kind of a Hindu Pakistan. That similar mobilization attempts in India need to be looked at very, very closely. So we need to look at it as an example that should not be found. So I'm not sure if this is a convincing answer, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, thanks. Let's take a few questions in clusters. So, Vikas, you have a question?
There is an empirical question. So, the existing scholarship says that Pakistan is insufficiently organized and they have given archival evidence and then two kinds of contest that take place in Pakistan. First, sufficiently imagined. And then you also quote your own sources. Coming out, whether they think that the archival balance is not favoring either debate. So how do we resolve that empirical question? Was it indeed sufficiently imagined? And I think here is sort of draw attention to the Shia idea that India is the place where Hassan Hussein comes in Muharram. So if India, if Hindustan does not good place, why would Hassan Hussein come to India every year during Muharram? So they were, so perhaps the imagination, it's not clear if it is imagined sufficiently. And I think that the existing scholarship isn't incorrect in that regard. In fact, Khalifus Zaman, who was cited in the presentation, he himself didn't go to Pakistan initially. If he was so clear about finding his creation, he would have left with the other thing and others to Pakistan, but he didn't. And so there has to be a non-partisan criteria to resolve this debate. Could you suggest something in this regard?
Yeah, let's take a few questions together because we're running out of time. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. And it's a very small question. Given your argument that you were putting in the father, I would be interested to know from you. I mean, how 1947 in Pakistan, how Jinnah could actually lead the whole politics at that time. And given the background of the creation of Pakistan, as you have argued, and the ulama kind of ulama role, and also the fact that Islam has created to make an Islam, to heaven for Islam in the whole region. So how could Jinnah come to power and secondly, how could he actually mention that Pakistan will be a secular country, given the background you have mentioned?
May I just add, may I just add something to this, and then there are two other people. See, thus far all the questions have been about discourse versus discourse. But I wish to say that we cover a lot of ground on symbolic mobilization. How did symbolic mobilization in Pakistan happen through discourse? You and I and all of us know that in contrast to the discourse per se, there was relatively little mass mobilization. There was, I know, but relatively little mass mobilization in terms of a mass movement, in terms of a mass movement for Pakistan. You would remember that when the Pakistan resolution was moved by Sir Sikandar Khan, who belonged to the Unionist Party, which was in power in Punjab, Sikandar had one leg in the Muslim League and the other in the Unionist Party, where his allies were Hindu and Sikh zamindars, and therefore he obviously felt unsure about whether to really mention even the word partition or indeed the word Pakistan in the resolution. So the resolution goes without those words, right? And therefore it does create a rather nebulous sort of ambiguous message to the Muslims of South Asia. They could have interpreted Pakistan of the future in various ways, and which is why people from the other end of the historiography keep saying that we are not quite sure whether this was a very well articulated demand. So I wonder how you would respond to these questions. There's a little question here.
Actually, I'm looking at this subject not as an Indian, not as a Pakistani, but as other nation that look the subject from another perspective. As a researcher, because we are students and some of us we are starting to do research, as a person that look at some subject, Palestine, level that it is a fixed answer. There is no gray area in this separation of Pakistan and India? Or do you think still there are some gray area that we have to look and find another answer? And if it is this way, the second, do you believe that still we need to do research and we should not accept whatever came to us by reading some of the other research? I think myself, I believe that it was not religion that became the reason for separation. And the crisis of identity that you mentioned about Medina, it didn't happen. In fact, it will never happen. No country can be the center for Islam except Saudi, because the holy place for Muslims is Saudi. How can some nation come and decide to keep their country as the center of Islam?
Right, there's a question.
मेरा सवाल बेसिकली एक्सटेंशन है पाकिस्तान के आज के पाकिस्तान से जुड़ा हुआ है। आज का जो पाकिस्तान है बेसिकली डेमोक्रेसी जो वहाँ हो रहा है वो क्या है? जो पाकिस्तान का कल था उसका एक्सटेंशन है, प्रोडक्ट है, या पाकिस्तान खुद जो प्लुरलिटी है उसको एक्सेप्ट नहीं किया, जैसे कि हिंदू और सिख को छोड़ दे इनसाइड द पाकिस्तान सिया सुन्नी और बलूच की जो स्थिति है, कहानी है, या अमेरिका का प्रोडक्ट है, या ट्रिपल ए अल्लाह आर्मी और ISI?
Okay, there's a question here, and I think that
1945 elections as a referendum, and my question is just an extension of what he just mentioned. The elections then, I mean, it was not a universal election.
Yeah,
it was
highly restricted.
Restricted. So the only people who voted were the upper class and the upper middle class, the landed class, and the people with graduation, etc., etc. So those are the people who actually went ahead and voted for Muslim League, voted for the idea of Pakistan. So the vote bank, as it were, for Muslim League itself was a very elite vote bank. So
yes, I'll add to it about 10% in the provinces and about 1% in the center.
Exactly. So even before, so the only time you had universal elections in these areas, I mean, in the subcontinent, were after 47. And after 47, of course, in East Pakistan, you had the Bangla, you had the Bengali issues coming up. And you never really had universal elections till 1972, till 1969 in Pakistan. And in India, of course, in 47, the universal elections were won by Congress. So in that sense, do you get the sense that Muslim League's idea of Pakistan, I mean, we don't know if that idea really resonated with the masses, because it was only the small elite which voted for Pakistan. So do we know for sure if the masses were for it? The literature that you cited, which, for...
Yeah, that's a very valid point that you make, because the franchise is restricted to people with a certain amount of property, pay a certain amount of tax, income tax, who have a certain amount of educational qualifications, who have served in the army, or widows of soldiers, so on and so forth. So the Muslim League with 75% of this vote, which is probably about 10%, the electorate forms probably about 10% of the population. So whether it is representative of the Muslim masses at large is a very valid question to ask. And as a historian, you can only say that, well, the Muslim League gains traction in this top 10%. Now you could go with, there are two ways of looking at it. Nehru, all the while believed, even during the time, between 37 and 39, when the Congress is consistently losing elections, but it's still, getting 30%, 25, 30, 40% of the popular vote in these by-elections, which again are a very restricted franchise. In 45, of course, the restrictions are relaxed a little more, so you have much greater population voting than in, under the GOI Act of 1935. So Nehru constantly believes that it's only the urban, upper crust, landlord Muslims who are in favor of the League. That the masses of Muslims are with the Congress because they are going to the people with a radical socio-economic program. It's our own the Muslim League, or rather the Congress, starts, of course, this Muslim mass contact program, and they go with their own version of bread, peace, and land. That okay, we will give employment to all, we reduce poverty, and they think that this definitely earns them some amount of goodwill and credibility and popularity among the Muslim masses. But yeah, it never quite translates itself when it comes to the hustings, to the vote. So you cannot quite make a total claim in this regard. On the other hand, if you were to go with Chris Bailey,
no, but the mass contact program of the Congress fails miserably, which is why it doesn't translate into votes at the hustings.
But again, mass contact program fails because there's this upper crust. It doesn't have anything, or it has something at stake, which is, I don't know, if the Congress program goes through, they're not going to be happy.
Sure, absolutely. So what I'm saying is that the Congress also has its own problems.
Yes, sure. Okay, so but on the other hand, if you were to go by Chris Bailey and his whole idea of the informational order, in which of course this is a desperately illiterate society, in which but yet very high levels of political awareness and consciousness here. How does it happen? So he of course talks about it. So if you were to go by the claims of the Muslim League walas, they would say that even though it's only this upper 10% who vote for us, we have overwhelming support everywhere. The Congress is, of course, there's also the other problem. The Congress is seen as a Hindu party, and they are hard pressed to kind of attract Muslims into their organization. Sorry, okay. I'm forgetting. What was your question? Sorry.
My question very briefly was this: that there have been questions about discourse versus discourse, but you should also look at discourse versus mass movements. All kinds of discourses are generated, but there are not too many mass movements that are organized for winning Pakistan, and the persons who come up with the resolution are very unsure as to what their future politics will be. Sikandar Khan is mobilized by Jinnah to move the resolution. He is a member of the Unionist Party in Punjab, which are in league with Hindu and Sikh zamindars as well. I mean, it is a party of zamindars. So he is absolutely unsure as to what will happen in the future. So he deliberately keeps the resolution vague, clumsily worded, doesn't even mention partition, doesn't mention the word Pakistan. So I just wanted your reaction to that.
To say that there is no.
No, I'm not saying there is no mass movement. I'm saying that if you were to, as he said, we have to show these things empirically. Now, if you have to compare the social composition and the extent of the mass movement of the Muslim League, say in the 40s, in the mid-40s, to something like the 42 movement, or to the 1930 movement, or even to the 1921 movement, which was at a lesser sort of extent and pervasiveness than the 30 movement, then surely one would have to concede that you don't really get all India mass movements for Pakistan. You don't even get all UP mass movements, or for that matter, all Punjab or all Sindh mass movements. So, it goes back to the same point that their support is insufficiently proved in elections and not really proved in any mass movement either. So, we are talking of discourses only. We are talking of 2 or 3 levels here. We are talking of constitutional negotiations, which, these people say, well, Jinnah is the man for that. And then we are the guys for creating a whole discourse. So the discourse is there, but because the mass movements are not there, no one quite really knows what will happen because the negotiations haven't happened until the very end, which is why people say that despite a very well laid out discourse, which might even go back to 1932 to Ramadari, because of the idea, the point is that nonetheless, there is a suddenness about it.
Well, one of the things that the evidence that one comes across there is every week hundreds or several Pakistan conferences going on in some towns, some qasbas, some cities. It's week after week. If you look at the police abstract for 7 years or even 5 years, few years of missing. But every week you have reports of Pakistan conferences being held to kind of talk about what this is. The other thing I try to do is to figure out, well, how is this discourse that you talk about, how is it kind of being reflected over now? Now, what kind of evidence can one look for? One of the things I was lucky about was, well, I was looking for the newspaper called Medina, which is a nationalist newspaper coming out of Medina. And in 1942, they opened their columns to the general readers, asking them to send entries about what is it that they understand about Pakistan. Do they like it? Do they not like it? Now, the editor of the newspaper says that he receives a flood of entries or a flood of letters. And this is the time when war is on, there is a quota of newsprint. So, nonetheless, what the editor does is that he picks up what are the most cogent essays on Pakistan, one by a supporter of Pakistan and one by an opponent of Pakistan. And then these are serialized over the next 15 weeks. One guy goes 15 weeks. Then there is a line, there are responses, brief responses to this guy for the next 2-3 weeks, followed by another 15 weeks of the proponent of Pakistan. So I would say is that from my own looking at the evidence, there are these Pakistan conferences happening all through, right from 40 onwards. People going, the UP Muslim League leaders, people like Mahmood Abad and others, they are also chairman of the Pakistan Waqf, the delegation which will go around, even in the majority provinces, to teach them why Pakistan is so important. And they're going about this fairly regular manner. So all I have is, of course, evidence that you have all these Pakistan conferences happening very regularly. Okay.
If you look at this short stories and novels from that period, you get a different kind of evidence. The literature is, it seems to be clear that the common man didn't understand Pakistan. For instance, you take case of Kai Masum's brother, half of the village, Adana. It's very clear that people there on the ground didn't understand, neither Hindus nor Muslims understood what's going on. What does this Pakistan mean to them? And then he also gives a very graphic description of a Pakistan meeting because it was shepherded by the graduates of the Muslim University, and there he shows that the erudite students had no answers to the questions posed by the village people. So perhaps if literature can be treated as an evidence in novel, short story, then I guess that the evidence points in favor of insufficient imagination. Because when people are very much that have lived through this, and they see it from first.
If you also look, there is also a lot of poetry which comes out. I've looked at some of this poetry which is being produced by, say, the Muslim National Guards, people who have their own Pakistan. And there's very extensive poetry about Pakistan, pro-Pakistan poetry.
Who was the Congress Muslim Partition and independent contribution to literature, poets, novelists, who are not directly affiliated to any camp. And these people,
well, I guess you are basically again, but people you are talking about are all people belonging to the progressives, and they have a particular take on partition. So Azim is very much part of.
Yes, about this insufficient preparation, and here I actually, Premji makes a case that this movement actually is linked right to the present. I don't know, I'm not a historian, so I cannot evaluate his arguments, but he makes that argument. But coming to this insufficient preparation or indigenation, can we bifurcate it into two? As far as the indigenation about an independent land for Muslims on the religious ground is concerned, it was pretty well imagined and agreed upon, and there was a say, a long history of preparing the ground. As far as imagination of how to run a nation as a political entity, its economics, its politics, its society, what it will do, maybe there was not enough imagination. Is it possible? Is it possible that if someone is imagining a nation on the religious grounds, then perhaps they already think that the imagination how the society will run is already available in the.
Well, this is a very, very interesting thing, and I much as I'm restraining myself, I have to say mention at least one sentence, which is that if you visit Pakistan often enough, and I've had the great good fortune of performing many hajjs there, you get this idea within Pakistan. There's a huge debate. So, are we an Islamic state? Were we destined to be an Islamic state? Or are we a state of Muslims who happened to live in South Asia? Once created, we want to be a state of Muslims whose culture, whose larger public sphere must be defended adequately, but we don't want to be an Islamic state. And I will just add one last thing to this. As far as the left is concerned, the left got implicated in various ways. These progressives did all of this, but you know that they also said that we must actually implement the right to self-determination. And the nationality question in the late 40s in South Asia means that the Muslims have a right to choose their nationality along religious lines. So, the left, of course, is a very complicated animal.
What you mentioned, one of the things that the Muslim League Wala, Jinnah himself, often says is, we are by far the clearest when it comes to imagining Pakistan. Hindustan or India, this idea of united India, is it going to be Gandhi's Ramraj, Nehru's Socialist Raj, or the right-wing some other Raj? They have absolutely no clue. And here we are giving you elaborate, the two-nation theory, the justification behind the two-nation theory, we are making it fairly elaborate. Why do you want to separate? So, in fact, it is claimed by some of Muslim League propagandists that it is India which is under-imagined, not Pakistan. And well, when it comes to the question of imagination, which nation is what constitutes a sufficient imagination? Which nation is sufficiently imagined? I don't think any nation is sufficiently imagined. A nation is a work in progress always.
So, with those profound words, that nations are always in the making, both in reality and in imagination. Maybe bring it to a close.
Okay. Sorry, we can talk later. Yeah.
No, we'll certainly talk later. We will certainly talk later. But, we've had a very cool discussion of the contentious points. Thank you.